Right, welcome all to today's conversation hour, we can call it that. Just by way of introduction, my name's Gary Stone. I'm one of 5 masterminders that I'll just mention to you in a moment who they are, that have been getting together for nearly 3 years now on a fortnightly basis, masterminding, well, everything to do with business and life, and primarily business, but we do get into other things and we get to know each other fairly well remotely. I live in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia. We've got 2 in Canada and 2 in the United States, and we've managed to keep the masterminding going for that time. So I'll just introduce you quickly. There's Leeza, who basically got this group together and has been a stalwart and kept it going. And then there's Theresa, who is in Canada. And Theresa has joined a little bit after we started, not that much after, but just maybe a couple of months. And then there's Dusty, who has been around from the outset, and Luc. Luc is in Canada and also been around from the outset. And we all met in a common place and have kept the mastermind going. So there's an initiative was to really, in this times of trouble, where most of us are perceived times of trouble, I should say, trouble. We decided to hold this session. We were spending a lot of time talking about the issues that we were going through and other people were going through and how we were dealing with it, and how friends and colleagues around us were dealing with it. So we thought there were a lot of good ideas that came out of it and suggestions, and we thought we would take the time during this time at home, if you like, kind of lockdown, that we would share those and have conversations and invite people in to ask questions, and you never know, ideas come out of it, and it's the togetherness, if you like, that gets the ideas flowing, and then we can go and apply those in our life. So that's the introduction. So what we're going to do is we've got a timekeeper, and we're going to stick very much like we do in masterminds to strict. So Dusty's the timekeeper, so he's got a puny noise he's going to make with some instrument he's got there, and we're going to stick to the time, and there'll be time to ask questions as well. So we're going to kick off the question that we've got today. This is the second week of a 5-week continuous consecutive weeks. And we've got a different question each week. And the question that we posed today is, what do you see as the greatest challenge at this time? And how do you suggest navigating it? What do you see as the greatest challenge at this time? And how do you suggest navigating it? And we're going to kick off with Leeza.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everybody. Nice to see all familiar faces, new faces. So the greatest challenge, as I see it, if you turn on your television, if you have one, or even turn on the internet, if you open your emails or look over the garden fence and talk to somebody who's there with your 6 feet distance, 2 meter distance, what you're going to be hearing about is what's going on, what the economy is doing, what the government's doing, what the virus is doing, what the doctors are saying, what the conspiracy theorists are saying. There's just information. And so what I have found in general, especially in crises, as I work as a crisis transformation specialist, is that people get externally dominated. That means that their awareness goes out external and it stays there, and it lets those external circumstances dictate actually what's going on within them. So prior to the crisis, you were going about your life, you had your appointments, you had your social life, your health, your private affairs. You were internally oriented, and you were aware of your externals. You had external awareness, but internally is where you were grounded. And what's happening is people are going external and staying there and not grounding themselves in their internal awareness. So the three things that you can do to alleviate that, to create external awareness and not be externally dominated. So when you hear information, is ask yourself first, do I believe that? Simple question. Do I believe that? Does it make sense to me? The second thing is, why do I believe it? Is the source credible? Is the information useful? Where is it coming from? How does it apply to me? Does it apply to me? And the third thing with B is, what do I want to do with that? If it's information, if it's a situation that I can impact and I can affect in a positive way, or I need to act on, then you do that. So you have these 3 clear steps in order to be able to disconnect from that external domination and be internally anchored. Yeah. So I open that up if there are questions or comments on that.
I think being able to pull our heads out of that external environment, especially the news, which is all so catastrophic and awful, and bring it back. Do you have a specific meditation or tool that you use to bring the focus inward as opposed to being trapped out there in that external calamity?
Well, as especially you know, Dusty, I come back to the genius of non-judgment, and it really is the practice of differentiating the facts from my experience of them. So if somebody says to me that, I don't know, a neighbor said to me recently, nobody should be meeting outside on the lawn because the virus can fly through the air. So I hear her saying that. That's a fact. I auditorily heard her say that. But then I get to decide, how do I respond to that? What's my experience of it? Is it information that makes sense to me? Is it a valid source or not? I know that the virus is not airborne. It's based in mucus, and it can only be contracted that way. So that didn't make sense to me. So that differentiation, I don't need to make her wrong for that. But in identifying what are the facts and what's my perception and response to them, then I can better navigate what's going on out there and how I'm going to respond.
Thank you.
There's, I'd also share, I put it in the chat room, especially for businesses. There's a short little mini series I did on a pivot plan, which takes people through external domination as opposed to being internally anchored with external awareness. And then the second piece being using your internal GPS, which we all have, and we abdicate in situations in crisis. That goes right out the window. We don't even turn to that wisdom that we have rooted inside of ourselves. And then the third piece is to streamline and strategize. Get rid of the information or the situations, the items, if they're material that you don't need right now. Do you need all the information coming at you? What's useful? What don't you need? And leave that out. And what's left, how do you want to use it for yourself, for your family, for your business? So I'd invite you to check that out. It's free.
Sounds good.
It's good, Leeza. I think we're going to get some similar responses here, but just put in different ways depending on the walks of life we've gone through. But I think when you've been on the planet a while, you kind of come to similar conclusions about how you might go about it. Well, if there's no other questions from to Leeza, then we'll move on.
If I may also say, Gary, just to interrupt, please use the chat box. So if somebody's talking and you have a thought or you want to make a comment, please use that. We will go through that at the end of the conversation and when we have time to discuss those as well.
Okay. Certainly, right. We're going to mix it up, and we are now going to go to Luc in Canada.
Bonjour, my friends. As you can tell, I'm French, for those who didn't know, so excuse my accent. I'll do my best. For me, the biggest challenge is what's happening these days. Slowly, depending on the country, the province, or the state, the lockdown is slowly getting out of the reality. So we see here in Quebec, the schools are reopening for younger kids. We see businesses are opening up. The curve has flattened. So I see it as the big challenge is to not let our guard down during these times. We've been at it now for over 3 months or so, that we change our lifestyles completely. We're all very tired of this reality. We can't wait to get to the old days, but I'm sorry to say the old days are not just about to happen. It's going to take a while. And as the virus still exists, as it's still very present, but we're going outside. Spring has sprung, except for Gary, of course, in Australia. But for us in North America, springtime has sprung. At last, we can go out and enjoy the sunshine, but we have to be extra careful. And so what I'm saying is, do not let your guard down. Keep the social distancing. Still sneeze in your arm. Don't wash your hands regularly. Stuff that we can't wait to say, okay, we're done with that, but we're actually not. So it doesn't take much more time than that to explain what I think is very serious challenge coming up for all of us is not to let our guard down. So we got to be vigilant. We got to persevere in being very extra careful. Some of us may have it but don't know, so we may spread it around. Some of us may meet people that we don't know have it, but they do have it. So let's keep at it. Let's be patient. Let's persevere and understand that it's a long run. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And what we've gone through so far is a small part of what we need to keep on going for the next few months.
Right. Any questions for Luc?
I don't have a question. I'd like, first of all, Luc, I appreciate you saying that, because I think there is a tendency when things seem to return to what was a normal pattern that we would return to normal habits. But I'd like to just, how should I say, emphasize, I have a real issue with the phrase social distancing. It's physical distancing.
Yes.
Because
Yes,
we are
very true.
craving, and one of the greatest stress factors, I just listened to an amazing talk on stress. One of the greatest stress factors that exists in our human existence is social isolation.
Yes.
And so we are all experiencing that. And it's wonderful when I talk to people, people aren't missing Starbucks, they're missing a hug.
Mm-hmm.
So that, even though that may not be what we return to immediately, I would like to encourage people to still find that way to nurture themselves, nurture these connections that we so long for, even though we may maintain that physical distancing or the other measures that we've been asked to adhere to.
Very good point, Leeza. And I agree 100%. The word social distancing is not the best way to see it. But I can blame it to my French. It's my French.
They say it in English too, Luc. It's not your language at all. It's just what's the term that's been coined.
Yes.
And look,
Yeah, sorry, Dustin.
Gary, go.
I was just going to say, how do you replace a hug in these times where you can't physically touch? And so often when we talking to people, we tend to gossip and criticize. That's kind of a human nature. That's our first reaction. If we hear something that doesn't quite fit with our belief system or whatever it is. So maybe we've got to learn to hug with our eyes and our face and our words rather than with our touch. And let that be our first response, rather than so immediately you thought you were going to hug somebody, then find another way to do it, and we can become better in our expressions and let the stuff that you were going to criticize go through to everybody else, and focus on giving somebody a positive response with your smile in your eyes.
Look, I was going to ask you if there was, there's some good things that are coming out of this in terms of what's happened in the physical isolation, not the social isolation. Is there anything you hope people will continue after we start moving back out into the world again?
Well, there are many things that I think we can take advantage during this crisis. For me personally, I've been in contact with friends, with family members, more so than I ever been, because I'm in confinement, I'm at home. So just this morning I had a chat to Messenger with a friend that it's been a couple of years since we lost contact, and it's awesome. So keep on reaching out. We can reach out as much as we can. It's not physical contact, but it's still news that we get. We do some FaceTime or some Zoom, and this is very precious. Also, your personal passions. How often do we hear people say, "Oh, I love doing gardening, but I don't have the time. I love reading, but I don't have the time. For me, I love playing guitar, but I don't have the time." Now I do. So use that time for your passions as much as possible. So to reach out and enjoy your passions, and those who live with you, like my wife, we don't need the physical distancing. So we have more quality time together, and that's very precious as well. So squeeze the juice of this love that you can give and receive as well.
So I want to say it's time, and I want to be real clear that, Luc, your wife doesn't live with me. So
I'm not sure where this is going, but we'll let that be.
Yeah, we better.
Okay, how are we doing for time, Dusty?
It's time
Next.
for our next person.
Okay, so we're going to move to Theresa now, who's also north of the lakes.
Yeah, actually, it's perfect timing because where I think that when I was reflecting on what is the biggest challenge, there's so many challenges, but for me, the biggest challenge is the distancing. Because at that really most basic level as human beings, what we long for most is connection, touch, and that sense of mattering and feeling included. And it's easy, you know, talk about the social distancing, Leeza, and the wording of that was very troubling. I was happy when everything shifted more to physical distancing, but even that, there's a sense of disconnect that exacerbates the crisis that we had pre-COVID of what 2/3 of the U.S. population, and probably Canadian, have been, there've been some research that are lonely, have been lonely. Were lonely prior to this. And so when we add to it this disconnection of 2 meters, no touch, and the fear that it's easy to get convoluted into a sense of even greater sense, as you were talking about social isolation, Leeza. And I've been seeing that in my practice as a psychologist with my clients, that that sense of loneliness as a big thing. And but the great thing is there's so many ways. I love what you were saying, Gary, about hugging with our eyes, finding ways to connect, using language of connection, actually cultivating skills that we didn't even know we had to express gratitude and appreciation more often. To be even more specific about, as the more specific we can be with our feedback, our positive feedback. I love it. I remember when you were doing blah, blah, blah. I've been reflecting, I've been reminiscing. The more specific, the more deeply we can receive that feedback, and we feel it's really delicious. And the other little hot tip I have is, you know, in addition to gratitude and talking about, you know, I look forward to next time we get together, or I love hearing your voice, is that we can also exercise this process, this little this hot tip I have, of where when we talk to people and we share really positive things, it's common for us to say something positive and then we follow it with the word but. I love how you blah, 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 but I would love if, you know, if you could do blah, 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 that would be even better. And the hot tip is just to change that one word but to the word and. And what you do then, as you bring in the paradox, you bring in this space for possibility and love, and there's a little bit of discomfort in it because it's the gray zone as opposed to the black and white zone, and it is actually really delicious in relationships, and it's quite affirming when you're connecting with people, and it inextricably cements more that sense of connection.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, in terms of any thoughts or reflections?
Just on the word but, Theresa, somebody once said to me many years ago, ignore everything that anybody says after they say but.
Mm.
Very wise, very wise.
I like the yes and one of the ways we get our clients to remember it is saying, don't show your butt in public.
That's great.
And however is just a butt with lipstick on it.
Absolutely. Yet we can get really creative with those butts, I'm telling you. And I always like to say that and we can say the most amazing things, but the land after butt usually is pretty dismal.
Sorry.
Yeah. I was just going to say that there's one strategy you can do if you want to empower the butt. If you want to put your butt in public, first put the negative and then follow it with butt, and then you're good to go.
Well, what I two things I want to address in the beauty of what you said. The first thing is the allowing yourself to sit with that conundrum of having both, because that's life, right? We like it this or that, but it's and. Our life is and. I can be furious and grateful at the same time. I can be happy and sad at the same time. And we don't often appreciate that we can hold all that. So that and allows us to become more comfortable with sitting with discomfort, or sitting with discrepancies, or sitting with seeming contradictions. The other thing I wanted to add is, for those people who don't have family members around, so I've got mine here part of the time, but when I don't, I'm Italian. It's like touching is like food. It's like you can't not touch, folks. So what I really have been encouraging clients to do is to tap themselves. So you can either do it with your fingertips on your body in the morning, literally, you hold just with the pads of your fingers all over your face, or as is a part of a yoga practice, is to doing it with fists. And you can do that on your, you know, bottom to top, top to bottom, however it works for you. And you literally, you wake up your nervous system, you get your circulation going, but it gives your body and your soul that sense of having been touched, even though you're the one doing that. But we need that as human beings. We need that touch. That's one way that you can do it when your loved ones aren't physically nearby.
There's maybe one point that I'd like to add to this, is that in this communication that we have with people through technology and all of that, there's always two things. There's the sending part and the receiving part. And just to be aware of this great balance that should exist in any conversation. There are a lot of people I know like to talk, but don't ask any questions. So take the time to say, well, I have something to share with you as well, just so that it's not one-sided. That's what I think would be very important to do in those ways to communicate with people through technology.
Yeah, and I just want one more. I love those hot tips too. And Leeza, that touching, tapping, being Italian as well. You know, we've got that together.
Right.
But is that sensory, that sensual awareness, and so the mindfulness practices of getting, you know, something soft and, you know, feeling things more, and using those mindfulness practices, tasting more fully, and even going and feeling blades of grass or leaves, the world, that it isn't the same. You know, it's great if there's a, you know, if you're lucky enough to have a pet or another human with you when you're self-isolating, but if you don't have it, then connect with the planet, connect with the other life forms, and like you were saying, Gary, you know, kiss and hug with your eyes, and watch those squirrels and smile with them, and dance with them, and so forth. So just adding to that.
Good. Right. Back to Theresa. Okay, we'll move on to Dusty now.
I'll try to time myself. All right. So, you know, I thought about this and I thought, what's the greatest challenge that we're facing? And I think it is fundamentally, we have to redefine reality. We have to redefine what it means to work. We have to redefine our social lives. We have to redefine who we are as we move through life. And I think that's got a huge challenge. I do not think this is the last pandemic. I think there's more to come. We have AI, and automation is going to replace 50% of the jobs within less than the next 10 years. We have huge waves of change, disruption coming. So being able to redefine who I am, redefine my work, redefine how we go about what we're doing, I think is really critical. And last time I talked about core orientation or core purpose as your gyroscope of being able to center you. I think the tip I would have is it's really beginning to get multiple perspectives and really beginning to get multiple insights from different individuals as we talk to them. And a way to do that is through scenario creation. And the simplest form of scenario creation is, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's the best thing that can happen? And what is most likely to happen somewhere in between those two? And then ask myself two fundamental questions. What are the top two things I can do that I can prepare for if the worst happens? What are the top two things I can do if the best? And what are the top 2 or 3 things I can do in what I think is the most likely? And then underneath that, the last question, my time's almost up, is to say what strengths and talents do I have and resources can I access? And then begin to talk to multiple people with different perspectives. And really, if it's a team or organization, do brainstorming to really come up with the best ideas and get multiple perspectives.
Very wise.
And even do brainstorming with yourself, Dusty.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can. I create mind maps. I'll create a central issue and I'll put all the major spokes, and then I try to develop those. And if I get an interesting one, I'll put another page and I make that the center and I spoke it out. It's Tony Buzzan's brain mind mapping process. And I also will talk to four geniuses like the four of you in the mind, in the mastermind sessions. Yeah.
It'd be like having a conversation with a dog.
Yeah. and those of you, the rest of you, just so you know, Dusty is great. He knows that flattery gets him everywhere, so he's great at it.
And he's also in the process of writing a book called Conversations with Dogs. So that's where that came from. One of the things I love the structuredness, and I love also the, Theresa, you were talking earlier about specificity. Mm-hmm. And to give yourself the opportunity to hold that worst case scenario and that best case scenario, to really, and in detail, like to really look at that, because what happens is people say that there's, the fear of the unknown. There is no fear of the unknown. You are very specific. If you really look at your fears, man, they are targeted down to the detail. And so by taking those scenarios and making them specific, you really are debunking their power to a certain extent, because you're saying, look, here it is. And then here's the best case scenario. So you're putting yourself in the driver's seat of where you find yourself in that landscape. I really like that.
And you also, then you've got action steps you can take, and you're also beginning to look at the resources you have, and you're not trying to do it by yourself. Mm-hmm. You're saying, who can I tap in the network that can really support me and help me with this? And then talking through some of these ideas. And that really helps a lot. And that is a social connectivity. And, and flattery is sometimes really true. I think all of us have creative genius inside us. And having spent the past 3 years talking to four of you, Allison, I don't know that well, but for the four of you, I have experienced the creative genius that you have, and you've all inspired me in different ways during these past 3 years. So I think it's touching into that richness, and it's that courage to be vulnerable and open to other people.
Yeah. And I really like kind of bouncing off what you were adding, Leeza, the specificity of these scenarios. It helps to redirect the mind. And when we are anxious, or we uncertain about what's happening, the brain, research shows supposedly, I don't know how they did the research, but that we have something like 70,000 thoughts a day, and that 90 to 95% of those tend to be negative and or repetitive. So when you instead intentionally, consciously make that redirection, and in a way that is empowering, and it gives you a specific thing you can do in each of those, it actually helps to, I think, change the pattern of that from the 90% down to maybe 85% or 80, and it becomes like a new practice of shifting the mind, shifting the heart into possibility thinking. And so I really like the simplicity of the elegance of that model.
That in building on that, Theresa, so I'm also a Feldenkrais practitioner, which is movement sciences, and Moshe Feldenkrais said something that I found really impactful, and I want to share that with you, and that is that true thinking only takes place when it leads to new action. Other than that, it's regurgitated thought. And if you think about that, I mean, that's really powerful. It's really powerful, because if you take those 70,000, of which 90-95% is reiteration, what a small, minuscule part of our actual creative processes are we using every day in our thoughts. And if we chose to really take the time and not regurgitate, not rehash the same conversation with neighbors, with friends, and emails, and so forth, and really have thoughts and engage with it, we have the opportunity more easily to be positive in our creation. Yeah, because we're not
Leeza, Leeza, would you repeat that one more time, please? That initial.
That true thinking only takes place when it leads to new action. Yeah.
And to add to that, really what we're going through now is worldwide is a period of perceived chaos, or not only perceived, real chaos. And quantum mechanics is about to go to a higher, better order, you have to go through a period of chaos. And if you don't go through that period of chaos, you're just going to stick to the repetitive thoughts, mostly negative, that you've had. So to scramble those thoughts and put them into a washing machine and throw them all around and then create chaos or go through chaos is the only way you're going to go to a new order. Otherwise, it's going to get stuck in the same old. And we need to do that in our lives, the way we think, our relationships with each other and businesses, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to, as human beings, somehow we've got to go through that chaos. Otherwise, we just get stuck in our old ways.
Gary, we need to move to you, but I just want to say that's why I think the biggest challenge we have is we have to redefine reality. Yeah. Redefine our reality, redefine it socially for ourselves and what it means to work. But now it's over to you for you answering the question, what do you see as the greatest challenge, or what is one or two key tips you want to share with us?
Well, I'm going to come at this from a stock market perspective, and there's a term I use called noise, and we get hit with noise all the time. And noise, to me, white noise, pink noise, all kinds of noise, is chaos. It's a bit of degree of chaos, but it's volatility. And volatility exists all the time. And really how we react to that volatility, and most of it is short-term, it's short-termish in the bigger picture perspective. And the challenge for us is not to allow that volatility to detract us from our long-term plans, goals, and desires. So what do you do about it? And in the stock market, that happens all the time. It's daily, if not daily, certainly weekly. And what happens with what's happened with COVID-19, it's obviously translated into all of our finances, businesses, personal, et cetera, and including the stock market. So how do we deal with that? We've got to step back and have a big picture perspective. We've got to look at history. We've got to take a bird's eye view. Get right up at 10,000 feet. Get away from the short-term volatility. Look at the big picture of our lives, of those around us, our businesses, our society, our community, and take that big picture view. Look down at it and go, hold on, let's get this into perspective. What evidence has there been of this occurring in the past? How did we handle it? Is it going to be like this forever? The answer to that is always no. So if it's not going to be like this always forever, how can it pan out? And it's what you don't want to do is get drawn down tangents and dead ends and cul-de-sacs by this volatility. We want to step back and say, okay, what's worked? What's time grown? Nothing new under the sun, and get that big picture perspective. And we've got to go do something that Leeza was talking about. We've got to look for objective evidence. We have to verify all this noise coming through us. And we've got to cut through the chaff, pick on what we can control, and not allow the things that we cannot control to divert us and detract us off what we're trying to achieve. So volatility is real. It's always been there to varying degrees. And what we've got to do is really get that big picture view, bird's eye view, 10,000 feet. Don't go down the dead ends and the cul-de-sacs. And what is our big picture? What is our perspective? How do we deal with this from that perspective?
Gary, I love that. I have a question on that. So I was actually with a group this morning, and we were talking about that one thing that's unchangeable. And I was relating it to the breath, that there's always a constant. There's something that never changes, ever. And so that volatility that you're referring to, when I hear you speaking about that, for me at the same time, there is a stability that's constant. And I know if I were talking about my own work or spirituality, how I would define that, but I'm curious, is there something in the financial markets that you could relate that to? So if things are volatile on the surface or in the majority, is there something that you could define as a constant that is going on at the same time?
It's a benchmark. So all the time we're benchmarking. So we're benchmarking in relative terms. So what we've got to find is, what is that constant? The constant in the stock market, and I suggest it is for everything else, is having a process. So you come back to an orderly process, a plan. So how do you get out of chaos? You make a plan. So your plan should be able to handle the chaos. And if it doesn't, right now, if the plan that you had in place didn't handle the chaos, then what you got to do is use this time now to reflect on, when we do get pretty serious chaos like we've had now, how will your plan react to that? Some businesses already have flown through this. Why? Because they had some kind of disaster recovery plan that they had in place, that if this happened, not this particular thing, but if something really bad happened, we would pivot to this. We would have the flexibility to do that. And businesses have done that. Most haven't, but in the stock market, you have a plan that handles low volatility, high volatility, all kinds of situations that you know ahead of time, you predefine your risk such that when the time comes, you're not making it up as you go, you just react to the process. And it's, so what is your stability? What is your, it's your plan. It's having a plan. And that plan never stands still. It's always being reviewed and reflected. And as new things, because every moment in the market, every moment in life is new, it's unique. It might be similar and it might look similar to something in the past, and there's nothing new under the sun, but the actual variables that control any particular moment are unique. So how do you reflect and take that and build it into your plan so that plan becomes more and more robust as you go through it? So you actually embrace times like this because you want your plan to be tested. Mm-hmm. So how does it get tested? It only gets tested in times of adversity. It doesn't get tested when, you know, the market's going hunky-dory and life's all plain sailing and everything's, only gets tested in times of adversity. And we're going to go, right, how did you handle this adversity? Let's modify it, review it. Hit me again with another period of adversity. I want to be able to handle it, bring it on.
Gary, I love that idea of the structure and a plan that holds to it. I also think there's one other piece that's part of that structure and plan, which is not letting your emotions run you.
Absolutely.
What happens in great times of volatility, there's some people who make lots of money, and there's other people, many people who lose money because they panic. They start selling or they buy on impulse. So having that structure and plan and having that discipline so that my emotions don't run me becomes a key piece to that, I think.
The entire reason that you have a plan, we call it an investment plan in the stock market, is to overcome emotion. That's the number one reason it's there. So you actually surrender to a process, a set of criteria that you've devised beforehand. So the discretion and the creativity, everything happens before the event. You put the plan in place. The plan's in place to handle the emotion, which you've now subscribed to the fact to say, when the adversity comes, I'm probably going to be very emotional about it. So where do I turn to? I turn to my plan and I go and read the words that I wrote before the adversity came. And that helps you control your emotion in the time when it comes. And the challenge is sticking to your plan. Yeah. Because, and at the same time, we call it mechanical investing, mechanized investing. And the idea is, you know, we'll never be 100% mechanical because we're humans, but we've got to just get better at it. So what is our humanity is being able to, you know, be grateful and to be able to hug with our eyes and our face. You know, a machine will never be able to do that.
We have 30 seconds left. Any other question or comment for Gary?
I think it's not specifically for Gary, but in general, Gary, what you were pointing to about chaos, there's a, and I'll actually put that in the chat room, in the chat box, whatever that thing's called also, a little clip that in order for us to move from one place to the other, things have to become chaotic. You cannot move from one stable situation to another stable situation. It's not possible. Even if you're going to be sitting and then you're going to stand up, you have to move you have to animate and put into chaos your physical being, the atoms, the muscles, the bones, everything starts moving, and then you can stand and then you're in a stable situation again. So that I'd like to just encourage people to see that chaos is not the enemy. It's not something that we need to be frightened of. The consequences, like you were saying, Dusty, there are people that get emotional about losing, or they panic and that's why they lose money. But there are 30 million people have lost their jobs. Yeah. There are people that have no income. There are single parents. I mean, we are going to see a lot of poverty. And so in that, how can we navigate those times? And I think everything that we're sharing here is supportive of that. And I think on a philosophical level or on a broad context level, to understand that chaos, that volatility, as Gary's using the word, is a part of life. And as that volatility and those changes take place, there is a foundation. There's something that's constant. And however, there are people that have faith, and it's faith. It could be your breath, it could be a relationship, the earth beneath us, that thank you is still there for us, right? That we look for those constants that we know we can rely on when the things that we thought we could rely on have become unstable.
And I just want to add to that too, because if the plan that was made didn't work, or if there's a sense of it's easy to go to a place of despair. When you're talking about a lot of people without jobs, there's a lot of hardship, there's a lot of health impacts. that the a backup plan, part of the plan may be to then be able to ask for help and find resources, and so our job really is to stay in that place of possibility thinking, being possibilitarians, that because we get in the crisis of creativity when we get stuck, or the plan that we had didn't work, whatever that plan was. And so to really go to having that, to have neuroplasticity, to have brain changes, we actually need novelty. So
Yeah.
right. So that's, it's like being open to that discomfort of the chaos, because it's only through that chaos that we can then have that sense of transformation.
So we're at the time point where we're going to open this up to questions from participants, from our 4 participants. If there's any questions that have been in the chat, or any questions you'd like to ask, any of the 5 of us, or just as a group.
I'd like to speak to that, Seth. Welcome. It's great to meet you. Great question. That actually really came to my mind yesterday. Yesterday was Mother's Day, and I happen to have the privilege of being a mom. But one of our daughters is quarantining elsewhere. We haven't had time together. And so the invitation to be creative, because we've always had certain ways of celebrating and being together. And so as we were trying to figure out, I didn't want Mother's Day to go without us being able to be together. And so I thought, well, maybe we could have a picnic at the park and do, like, we could maybe do charades or play, Yahtzee with our own dice, and, with, sitting. Anyway, so it inspired this really creative, very different. We'd never had a Mother's Day that looked like this. And then we were at the park, and there were, it gives me shivers. There were all these people who were also at the park in pods, and there was just the appearance that you could just feel the gratitude. There was a whole different energy of people not taking each other for granted. It's like we get to, because actually today was where we live, the first day we were supposed to have more proximity. So it's really been a buildup, and so people are just appreciating being able to see with each other and be together. And it was so beautiful. My 18-year-old, who does live with us, as we were driving home, she said, that was so fun. Now, she's a teenager, and she really is a teenager, but she said, let's make that a new family tradition. Right? And I'm using that as an example, not that that's the only tradition, but more we can think about the newness, the novelty. What are the, and Margot, before you were mentioning, before we started about, the doing the art, and Luc, you were talking about playing guitar, that this is the gift that it's actually going on, because we don't change a habit within a week or two. And so we've had the gift of this going on for months now, so that we could actually start to get that, again, the neuroplasticity. It takes about 30 days for a baby stem cell to become a new synapse. It takes about 3 months for a baby stem cell to become a new brain cell, or a new nerve cell, and to change the infrastructure. So I think we're on it, but but being aware of that complacency, the tendency towards complacency, is something that if we're just what you're talking about, that awareness, that consciousness, and the more we can use our social media, use our from our hearts. One person led to the pandemic globally. So you, Seth, or you, Allison, or you, Mark, any of us, Sherry, each one of us can do the same. So if we can decrease the complacency within ourselves and in our little world, we're going to have a whole new world that is more conscious and loving and kind and full of gratitude.
I'd like to make one mention on that, and I also saw that Sherry posted a question. Gary, I don't know if you'd want to read through that, but there's also the belief, as humans are, that when this is done, we're going to always be creating and keep doing what we're doing, which would be wonderful. However, habits are necessary. Like, we don't stand up and say, okay, now you put the left foot, you lift your hip, you bring the other shoulder forward, you put the foot down. I mean, we have habits because they help us navigate through life. The problems occur when those habits become so ingrained that we don't pay attention anymore. So I would also say, Seth, to answer your question, is to become intentional about those things that we do ritualistically, or if you want to call them habitually. So that if we are meeting with people, to be intentional about it. if I'm going to engage with someone, either it's on the telephone or I'm going to be making a meal, to up-level that mindfulness so that it doesn't mean that I have to, you know, be wearing a tutu and, you know, dancing the samba while I'm cooking dinner. Could be fun, might do that tonight. But to infuse that with an awareness of the appreciation of the repetition of it. So it doesn't have to always be novel, but your approach to it or your intentionality can be fresh each time. Speak to Sherry's question, Gary. Oh, you're muted.
Sherry used to be part of this group for a while, so welcome, Sherry. I did see you pop into the call. So Sherry's is in education. She's a teacher and she helps teachers, and she's written books and put programs in place to assist teachers from burnout and things like that. That's not what's in the question, we just know that. But what Sherry is asking is been some changes in tests and things that have happened in education. So Sherry's question is, what suggestions do y'all have for how education, what suggestions do you all have for how education should look when we are on the other side of this?
I think weans believe that education, yeah, like weans, y'all, right? It's like the saying in the South, I was born a little slow and took a step backwards. I think education, there's talk about some colleges aren't going to make it coming out of this. I think one of the things that I've been reading about for the past 5 years is about democratizing education in a way and lowering the expense of getting higher level education. So I think one of the shifts is going to be more to trade schools that make sense. It's going to be more online learning. It's going to be more active learning where you're connected with mentors around the world. I think that it's going to be that kind of network and creating that sense of connectivity, which is the opportunity. If we go back to the way college and universities have been done for the past 50, 100 years, I think that's going to be a tragedy. If we go back to working the same way we've worked the past 30, 40 years, that's a tragedy. Americans have been sleep deprived. It has affected their health. It has affected their weight. It has affected their demeanor, their mentality. So I think the opportunity here is, as I said, we have to redefine reality and what our reality is. And Seth, what I love about your question is, one of the chances I think here is if you think about what Theresa and what Leeza were saying, it has to do with what's the attitude I want to cultivate? How do I want to bring joy into my life? And where do I feel most passionate? And so if I start living from my passion and what brings me the greatest joy, and I begin to cultivate those habits, and I start talking with and connecting with those people that help cultivate that in me, that's going to be the way in which we're going to grow and learn. These 4 people that I hang out with virtually every 2 weeks, they've been really important to my growth and development over the past 3 years. I think that that's one of the things we can do is help feed each other that way.
I'd like to, absolutely, Dustin. I love that you always bring so much heart. Well, actually, all of you. That's why you're all here. Anyway, I'd like to speak to what Sherry said also, as having worked with educators in schools for so long, and also my daughter's currently in the university. Having spent most of my life overseas, where you can get an entire college education for $10,000 total, what I'm praying is that the educational system here will de-exclusivize itself and make itself more available to everyone. However, that means funding, and this country is allergic to federal funding, well, for certain things. I'd like to see education, higher education available to everybody. What I am concerned about, and I've heard people say this, who needs higher education? We have the internet. Oh my God, that's such a frightening statement for so many different reasons. Now, what you were saying, Dusty, to be able to have mentors, you know, across the globe and different types of opportunities, but to have that in a system that is structured and also monitored by higher education, because what is offered in our school systems and also in our colleges is the opportunity to learn. It's no longer learning by rote, putting in information that we have to retain, which is how I think some of us grew up. But now we have to learn how to learn, because our world is so fastly changing. And that possibility really is available in education. So I'm really, and I'm going to be one of the proponents, I'll be right next to you, Sherry, of making sure that our schools whichever ones they are, that they are geared to, they're available to everybody, and they're also being infused with human beings and also with content that are going to up-level our society and our ability to build a richer society, rather than having mayhem or just getting rid of them.
Yes, some good points. What I'd like to see, and I don't think it's going to happen, is I'd like to see the depoliticization of schools, particularly primary and high school, primary and secondary education, become highly politicized. There's been this move to get into what I'd call periphery things rather than the basics, on the back of getting kids ready for life. And they moved away from the basics, and they fill their lives with things that are not educational for getting the basics and the platforms in place. They've moved to things that they think might be, and they've lost the basics. And that's happened very much so in Australia. Here, Australia's fallen way down the education levels. And I think it's theoretical educationalists who don't have time at the coalface in front of students that have come up with these things. And I don't follow the American situation too closely, but my wife's a teacher, so I end up reading a lot more about education than I probably should. But I think we need to get back to basics. And I think not only in schools, I think in our lives, we need to get back to basics. We tend to get caught up in things that are not core to who we are and what we're doing. And we spend a lot of time on getting into things that we have no control over, having a view, and that view it's never going to be heard, and probably don't want it to get heard. But it takes us away and detracts us from who we are, what we're good at, and what our cores are in our business and our family.
And Gary, I like what you're saying, and I'd like to just amplify something. When our kids were going to school, we put them in the Quaker school, the Friends school. It wasn't known for its intellectual development. It was focused, though, on emotional intelligence, which was 4 times greater.
Resilience.
I'm going to just tell you, my experience, I've never met an executive or anybody who's ever failed in their family, at work, or organizations that failed because they weren't smart enough. They failed because of a lack of emotional intelligence. So for me, basics is bringing back a sense of emotional intelligence, how to cooperate, how to manage my emotions, how to deal with emotions, how to accept them, how to find the courage to move through fears rather than let my fears define me, and teaching people how to think. How to think is the most important thing, and being able to cultivate that creative genius that I think is in almost everybody that gets pushed out in the normal way we educate them. So I think we need to reimagine and reinvent education too. So that for me is fundamental.
Dusty, and that I think is exactly what's happening, that this crisis situation, this external crisis situation has brought us to ourselves.
Yeah.
We have to come back to ourselves. And there's a term that I use which fits right in here, and it's self-studentship. That we become the content of the study of ourselves, because when we're being forced to come back to basics. We're no longer spinning off into these areas that really are away from who I am, why am I here, how do I live my life, and how can I serve others. But this crisis has brought us back to, okay, now who am I, where am I, what am I doing here, because we don't have any other choice now with the circumstances. And that's a beautiful thing.
We have 5 minutes left in our time, folks.
Okay, we have another question
here. And just talking about, I think Sherry's saying more of the same, but just resilience, building resilience at schools. You look at what's happened the last 30 years, they've been so litigation mindset that they've wrapped kids in cotton wool, and they haven't had to deal with crises and times of adversity because they just don't get exposed to them in case somebody sues the school. So we've got to actually get kids to be able to build the resilience, build the emotional intelligence to be able to handle adversity in life. And from the thinking perspective, there's got to be more arithmetic and maths and problem solving that goes into the intellectual side of things, rather than being told. I don't know what happens in the United States, but certainly here in Australia, a lot of teachers are teaching their opinions about things. They've got no basis in evidence whatsoever. It's their.
Well, that's also the same with our news. With our news, and that's why I come back to what I said earlier. What am I hearing? Do I believe it? Why do I believe it? Because a lot of our news has done this as well, because we have gotten away from the basics. I'd like to just take a moment, if I may, and we have some wonderful conversation going on here in the chat. Allison says, love this conversation about education. There's so much possibility in this moment to redirect the battleship of public education. Eamon Allison, love to hear the perspectives of people who are not professional educators. I've been in the educational realm for over 25 years. It's moving. And had the opportunity of homeschool 2 of my 3 kids for 11 years, trained teachers in the classroom. Beautiful.
Wow.
And
That's
Seth
big,
says,
Alison.
wouldn't a transformation of education require decoupling from government?
Yeah, and I think that these are great comments, Sherry and Allison. One of the great things when people stopped, there's the kids in school and even grade school, and the parents were all stressed about keeping the curriculum up. And I told them, my clients, I said, take them out in the garden with you, teach them about the soil, teach them about the worms, play with the food, learn recipes. You'll be learning math, you'll be learning chemistry. And but even more important, it's in this container of the context of building the emotional intelligence, the relationship. This has been one of the other great gifts. One of the many gifts of this is that parents are actually paying attention to their kids, and kids are paying attention to their parents because they have no one else to look to. So because we had gotten in this habit of being disconnected. Yeah. And we used to have this belief that it's not about the quantity of time we share, it's the quality of time. Well, hello, big news flash. Yes, quality is important, but also quantity is too. And this is the communication of mattering, and the more we can bring that sort of element into the schools and focusing on how the kids can teach each other to matter, and to let each other know that they matter, and that become a core part of the curriculum is kindness, as the Dalai Lama talks about, which I'm all about, is that, this is what we want to focus on, is how can we learn to be kind? And as you're talking about, Gary, how can we teach our kids how to deal with the unexpected? How to develop plans, how to navigate crises. And as a psychologist, I see sometimes people feel so desperate that they end up getting very depressed and maybe feeling like they can't do it, and their only option is to not be on the planet anymore. And we want to teach kids that there are always other options, even if we don't know what they are.
We're at our 1 minute mark. We have 1 minute before 8. Sorry.
I think we've covered quite a lot today, and I think what we should do is call it a day there, but introduce the next session, which we're going to have back next week at the same time. We're going to have another big important question to answer and discuss and converse about. This is all about, is conversations and coming together and sharing ideas, which is what our masterminds are about as well. And that's why we get together every couple of weeks.
And I'd share on that point, the question that we will be discussing next week is, how can you claim the gift hidden in this crisis?
Yes.
So we'll probably get a little bit more
action.
practical.
We've been inching into there already.
Joining us. It was great.
We have been. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you all for being present. It's been awesome.
Thanks, Mr. Timekeeper.
Thank you.
All right, friends, we will see you then soon. Take care.
Bye for now.